Welcome back to another ground up SCX24 build, and today we've got a pretty complex one, pretty pricey one. So let's see what's in this box. So you know I've got my stand ready to go for every new build. We'll get that out of the way. So the bulk of this stuff is coming from little guy racing parts. So everybody's familiar with LGRP at this point. They make some great tires, some great axles, and now some other great stuff. So let's get the main guy out of here that is the show. So this is the brand new R Factor. So this is the body kit and cage all in one. So everything you need for the top part of the chassis. So we've got that guy ready to go. So what else do we have? So then we've got a lot of parts for the frame kit. So this is hardware and various pieces that go on that frame kit. So we ought to have a frame kit in here, and we do. So we have the all billet frame kit minus those extra plastic pieces you just saw there. We've got links in here. So this looks like the full chassis kit to go under the R Factor body. We've got some masking and stickers for that body. And then we've got a lot of stuff to get into here. So let's just get this box out of the picture and see what we're working with. So somehow a shift servo ended up in this box. So that's good news. So we've got a nice steering component. We've got some Exo USA 52-degree U-joint CVDs to try out. So that's also nice. Let's see what else we've got. So some main things here, it looks like. We've got a full-on front axle and rear axle assembly ready to go, all billet aluminum. Nice big wide Super 8s. So this ought to set that up just perfectly since this is designed around Super 8s. So to go with that servo, I've got little guy's new limit strap that is servo mounted, and they give you a lot of different strap options. So we'll set that aside. We've got the little guy servo tray with the 3 adjustable positions for your upper link mount, so you can lean that axle back. So we'll see if this is gonna work for the build. If not, we can always go to Mofos. Speaking of Mofo, we've got a Rockwolf ESC right here, and we've got a little FlySky micro receiver to power this guy up, make it happen. We're trying out some little guy telescoping shocks. Haven't used these before, but again, this is hopefully going to work well with their kit since it is their shocks. And it looks like on their site, most of the rigs they show are running telescoping length. So we can play with the limiting of these, but I think we're going to start out and plan for those. A little bit more mofo here. This is going to pair well to that Rockwolf. We have the NanoBam little micro brushless motor here, but we're gonna need something to install that on. So we've got little guy's brand new, this is an M something transmission. I forget the name of it, but it has multiple different gear sets available. I think the one it ships with is overdriven from stock, and that means just faster. It's not actually overdrive to the front axle, it's just faster all around. So we're gonna set that aside. We have some replacements to some of those plastic frame bits. These are shock towers and billet. So that is just an unneeded upgrade. We've got some extended +1 hexes here, which are typically required with these Super 8s that I've found. Got some brass diff covers for a little weight. We've got a ramp crab adjustable link riser. We have the matching shift Nano M servo horn in the etching. Let's see, we've got the drive shafts front and rear that come with the, or that pair with the chassis kit and this R Factor. And then last off, we've got some brass knuckles, and we may bump those up to something heavier, we'll see, but those are little guys. And then we've got some other billet options here. So cross braces, and then this is the unicorn body mount and billet. So a couple more unnecessary upgrades that you don't need unless you want to just make those parts billet. But as you can see here, we've got quite a bit of building to do in front of us. But anyways, we're gonna slowly dig into this pile, see what this stuff's about. I don't think I've got any painting weather, so the body probably won't come till later, but we can get started on everything that sits under it. So let's dig into this. Wow, now that is a mess of parts to have on the table from just having a few packages open. So basically I've got the two big packages open, which are the metal components and the plastic components of the comp frame kit, which comes with the links on the metal side, which is nice. It comes with their own unique flat skid design, nice beveled edge on the front and rear approach. It is not reversible or flippable as far as the transmission on the skid, but the skid, of course, is symmetrical. So you could flip the whole skid within the frame. Speaking of the frame, pretty unique here. It's got some thickness to it and it's all aluminum, quite a bit of holes. Looks like upper link mount or lower link riser mounts, excuse me. And looks like your bumpers, hinge or whatever, front and rear. It's got a nice rake to it here for that skid on the approach and departure. So really cool looking frame, very different from anything on the market that I've seen. As far as the plastic bits, you've got all your kind of brace tray components. You've got your plastic sliders. It looks like these may interface with the sliders. Have no idea what this big long piece is. Looks like you get some shock spacers. And then I've got my other three packages open back here are my billet cross members, the shock towers, and that unicorn mount that I'm gonna switch in. So that's basically the comp frame kit in a nutshell, plus those few add-on switch outs. And then I've got the R-Factor body out here because it appears to have a unique front bumper mount. So that's gonna be swapped in for the one that comes with the comp frame as a standard. But man, it looks like I've got quite a bit of work ahead of me. And luckily, they do give you hardware instructions. So there are no visual instructions other than going to the website for reference, but those will come in handy. So I think before I get everything open, too many parts and pieces on the mat, I'm gonna get a little bit of mock-up assembly going, and then we'll take a look at some of the other components we'll be using. Back at the little slider progress here. So I've got it kind of partially assembled and I've got the parts laid out here. I figured out that this looks like it is a rear bumper that screws to the body. So this may be for the actual X Factor. These are actually little rocker panels that screw to the slider edges that looks like they capture the body edge. This brace goes to the front billet piece that we're going to swap, but you may not need this with the cage kit. Still not sure exactly what that piece is. Got my billet piece, I've got my discards back here, and I've got 4 of the links hung because you really need to get those hung before you put the skids on. The skids actually cover those holes. And speaking of holes, you can see here on the frame, all the countersunk holes go to the outside, and the same with the shock towers. So it gives you a nice flush edge there when you get everything mounted. So these bevels on the underside are actually for the lower links, for those wide Super 8s. So that is why that's cut out. So that's nice. But speaking of connections here, you can see the shock towers have some play in them, both front and rear. The rear seemed to tighten up a little bit once I got the cross brace in there. It's quite a bit tighter, maybe because of all this plastic pulling it in with these connections. But this front piece does have something, I think, that comes out to that aluminum front bumper, so that may brace it a little bit further, but just something to know there. And then as far as hardware, the 10 millimeter that they give for the links, for these lower links, I could not get my MIP driver in the hex head or my dynamite, so I swapped in my own 10 millimeter. And then they say use 5 millimeter for this connection through the skid, but you can see it goes through the full width of the frame, so it barely bites into that skid. So I swapped those for some 8s to get good engagement there. But that's basically the slider, I guess, as far as we can go right now without really getting into the next package, which, speaking of that, I think that is going to be the R-Factor body and cage set. Okay, we've got even more stuff on the table, if that's possible. So all of this, minus the slider under the body, is out of that one bag. So this is the R-Factor cage and interior panel set and you get this sick ass Lexan body. So this looks like super like fun haver, wide bodied, new style Bronco, but just a killer look here and super long compared to an SCX24. But you can see how long this chassis is starting to get, and we don't even have the front nose on it. So definitely gonna be more of kind of an 18th scale size, I think, with the wide axles and the length. But anyways, just a killer body. And of course it comes with the masks and a few stickers for that guy. So let's set that aside. Don't think we have room for it on the table. I'm gonna slide that out of the way. So this is what we're looking at here. And the main thing is probably this cage. So this is something you can run on its own without the body panels, with the body panels, with the actual Lexan body, or without. So a lot of options here on the look. So it's really cool. So you can take it out with the body one day, and then you can remove that and have the full buggy look without having to do any work, all under one build, which is super cool. So like I said earlier, this did come with some billet parts. So it comes with 3 parts here that replace these 3 plastic parts, it looks like. And then it has its own unicorn mount and plastic, which I think we are replacing as well. And then the sliders are unique for this as well, and it gives you rockers, it looks like, to fit that Bronco body or R factor. So that's all kind of pieces we'll have to swap out, we're gonna discard, we'll get those changed over to that slider. And then the remaining pieces, as you can see, are all the body panels. So these are just like the plastic ripper kit as far as the print and the quality. And you get the same exact seats, I believe, that's in the plastic ripper kit. And then you get a radiator assembly. Don't know what all these parts are for. Looks like part of the cage hinge back here, potentially. So I just kind of have them laid out. I'm not sure where they go. We do have a winch, just like the ripper. So some familiarity, at least for me, since I've built that plastic ripper, but quite a bit here. So I know what I've got to use right away is this front piece, and then I'm going to look at fitting that cage on the chassis and see if we can get a little more complete slider, and then we'll go from there. Back with a little bit of progress and a little bit of discovery here. So you can see the frame looks a little different. Got a few parts swapped in. So I've got the R Factor front bumper mount attached to the frame. Got the R Factor specific sliders, and then its rear body mount and hinge. So this piece actually replaced the piece that I had installed that is much longer with a different hinge. So that shortens this up, which is nice, much better departure angle. So that goes to the discard. And then this remaining plastic bit is actually an outer bumper. So this will go on the outside of the Lexan, kind of sandwich it to that billet hinge. So that will allow the body to hinge open right there. So that's kind of how all of these pieces interface with the existing frame. So then I was gonna move to the actual cage here. So we'll get this out. So these pieces here in the front actually attach to the cage and the frame. So this is kind of a bumper extension. So that'll screw in here, and then it actually mounts right there as the cage drops on. This triangle will mount right in here, and that's what the unicorn body mount attaches to. So that's kind of the remainder of the cage pieces. So I was going to actually get this on and mock it up, but let me get this guy out of the way. So if we get a good look at it here, you'll kind of notice something. So I didn't pick up on that right out of the gate, but you can see this part of the cage is really warped in. So it should be nice and vertical, basically like that side, as far as mocking up the panels and on the sliders. So this bottom one is just really kind of twisted in, and it's a pretty stout plastic here. So that must have kind of gotten heated and warped. So a couple of options here. I think the first one I'm going to contact Little Guy to see what they have to say, but I'm already thinking I may have to go at this with a heat gun if there's no other option, see if I can soften that up and get it back into shape. But other than that, everything else on the frame seems to be in pretty good shape as far as alignment. It's just that one little back piece, but it may have kind of twisted the rear end a little. Looks like it did. So, you know, we'll see if we can get that worked out. But I think for the time being, we're gonna have to put that aside and not let that slow us down. And we'll go ahead and look at some other components and see if we can't go ahead and move forward with this frame. Figured the next item we jump into is the new MR24 transmission from Little Guy and the NanoBam from Mofo. So this is the new stock of NanoBam. So it actually has a NanoBam label on it, as well as the typical Mofo RC that was on the old version. So that's how you know you've got a brand new fresh NanoBam. It'll actually say that on there. So let's put that aside. No issues there, at least without testing it. So you can see I've got this transmission fully pulled apart here. So what I found upon opening this guy up, getting it out of the package, it was fully bound up, would not spin at all. So of course I loosened all the screws on each side of the assembly. So there's basically this side that attaches to the spacer, and then you can see the gears rest in here. And then you should have this other side as a cover that sits on here. So if you look, you can see the large gear, large bearing sits up higher than the small bearing, and it's fully seated. So that's the issue. So with this crank down, that was flexing the case and binding everything up. So putting this actually on here, it will not seat. And I've tried everything. I've got the gears in here backwards, so let me get that in there the right direction. But no difference there. You can still see it sitting lower than the large gear. Let's get these seated. Get that seated. So it's still lower. And that seems to be what the main problem is here. So you put this on, I can get this top flush, as you can see, but that flexes the bottom apart. And if I get the bottom kind of squared up, there's a gap all the way across. So there's an issue here. Either the bearing seats aren't deep enough or this black spacer is not wide enough. So the only thing I can see is adding spacers in here and having a gap actually in your transmission to be able to tighten everything down, but not actually flex that cover plate and bind everything up. So again, I've emailed Little Guy to ask them if this is a common issue that they've run across, but have not heard back yet. I did hear back on the cage. They were very responsive, wanted me to send in some pictures, so that is in the process. So we'll see where that ends up, but for now, it looks like we are not going to be messing with the transmission and motor assembly. So luckily, we have a ton of parts here to fill the time. So we've got a lot of things to get into, so let's do that. Moving right along, I've got two of my favorite SCX24 items out on the table, the Shift Nano M servo and the Super 8 axles. So let's take a quick look at the specs here on this servo. So it is just insane at 8.4 volts, 151 ounce-inches. So that's something I didn't mention earlier. I think we're gonna end up putting a BEC on this servo to get that full potential. So setting that aside and looking at these Super 8s, I've never had an issue with these assemblies or any of the parts for these when I've built them. So always just super nice fitment and machining. However, there are a few little quirks that I have noticed in using these. And one of those is that their fixed length steering length and their knuckles align the wheels just perfectly. But if you use some other brand knuckles, you get some toe in. So I've actually got a rig that I can kind of show that on right here. So you can see this wheel's pretty straight, that one's pretty toed in, and we've got the fixed link in brass, but we're using some off-brand knuckles here. These are like Coda Racing. So some little difference there in the knuckle. So I've got on order the adjustable 349 steering link for this guy. So we're gonna steal this brass fixed link, put it on this guy, and since we're using Little Guy brass knuckles, which are no different than these aluminum, should have no alignment issues there. So the second little quirk with these that's known is you've got to shim the servo tray. And I usually do that with some 3M tape, just some double-sided, maybe 1 or 2 layers, whatever's needed. And that snugs that up and keeps it from rocking. And then the last little item would be the hex fitment. So just because where the pin is, A lot of times the hex, if you tighten the wheel down, it won't seat on the pin before the backspacing starts crushing into the bearing. That's why you get binding. So I typically get the +1 hexes, sand off some backspacing so those will fully seat on the pin. And then the reason I get the +1 is so they have that, since they're pushed in further, they have a little more face to get out here to the thread. So you don't have any problem tightening a thin wheel hub down. But just those 3 little quirks that I've noticed using these over time, no big deal. The other items here, we've got a ramp crab adjustable link riser for the rear, and we'll just see how that works with those plastic trays in the back of that frame. May not be able to use a link riser. Then we've got the limit strap holder, I guess, that goes across the top of the servo, and then the various tension bands that we can set up a little bit later in the build as needed. But I think I'm going to go ahead and start switching in these parts. One thing somehow I forgot to get on the table was the brass diff covers. So we're going to add a little more weight to these as well. So I'll get those on, get the gears greased up, and we'll check this steering throw versus what we're seeing right now with a little bit of gap here. See if we get something better with these new axles. So stay tuned. Checking in with a little axle progress. So I've got the rear axle complete here, spinning nice and freely, greased up, no surprises. Got the link riser on there, and I did have to put a little piece of double side in there as a shim, you can see. So on the hexes, you can see I've got a stock hex on this end. So this ended up looking like it may work. It'll just be dependent on the wheel. So there's still some play to that bearing, and if the hub is not too thin, that should tighten down just fine. And you can see the difference on this one. So there is none of the stub exposed. It actually recesses in there just a hair. So you could tighten down and put all the pressure on that hex. It's still got space to the bearing. So either way will work. It's usually just dependent on the rim, but good to have options there. So I may start with the plastic ones on the rear. We'll see what's needed on the front. They're usually a little bit different setup. And speaking of the front, a little bit of discovery here as well. So you can see with these new axles in, I'm basically laying on the axle here. But there was a note on their website that said, remove this bearing during install. So I didn't know if that meant remove it during install and replace it during install, or just take it out. But what I've discovered here is with it installed, it starts to kick. You can see it move there. So it gets down, of course, when it's at its 90, it's fine. And then as it rotates, it wants to buck. This side, however, I did not install that bearing. I just kept it out. So we're laying on the axle here. We're gonna do the same turn, and you can see it just barely buck. So definitely the way to go on this is to remove this bearing at the end of the axle totally and leave it out. So I'm gonna take this one out, and that should alleviate that large amount of bucking you see here. But so far, if they both end up being this smooth, I'm gonna be pretty dang impressed. Let's flop it, look at that, just laying on the axle, just a little bit of buck. Not bad at all. So really good turning angle. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this guy up, see if there's any more surprises, and I'll come back and check in. Okay, got both outer axle bearings removed, and that seemed to be the trick there. But you can see now my issue is the actual drag link. So I'm hitting that diff there before these knuckles can actually rest on the axle. We're pretty close. We're definitely further than we were with the CVDs that were in there, but we're not laying on the axle as it was. So a couple of options here. First would be to go to a higher clearance link, like a custom one like RC Steve 710 or the 3-flow 9s. But without spending any money, I could take a Dremel to the back side of this, give myself just a little more clearance, and I could make this happen. But before any modification, it's really going to be dependent on the build, whether I can actually achieve this much turning without ramming into the links or the shocks or the body. or the cage. So I won't really know that until we get it fully mocked up. So I think I'm gonna leave it as is, which is still pretty damn great right there. But pretty happy so far. And then you can see I got the servo on there, and the little bracket actually acts as your washer, so you don't need any washers. So that's kind of nice. This will have to kind of loosen up and come off to slip under the rubber bands when we get to that point. But other than that, I had to use a piece of double side under that tray as my shim. But everything is nice and smooth, greased up. So that does it for the front axle. And you know, I did take that brass link off of here so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. But before you want to go switching all your trucks to those 52-degree CVDs, you've got to make sure you can make it happen. So I may actually switch some into this ride to get a little further steering, but in doing it, I'm going to have to move my shock a little more vertical so I'm not just crushing into it as I am already. So a few things to consider there, but definitely some killer axles if you want to be able to achieve more steering. And one thing I forgot to mention on this shift servo, the actual screw for the servo horn, it's a star, so you need like a T6 to actually tighten that down. But I think that is going to do it for the axles, so moving on. Next up, we are moving on to shocks. So I've got those little guy telescoping shocks out here. These guys come with 3 springs, and they're set up kind of opposite of typical, with the black being firm, silver being medium, and the golds being the soft. So I've swapped in a gold spring on this one, and it is super, super smooth. I think I picked up the 48s, so I went fairly conservative. I think they offer these in 3 lengths. But what I really like, besides getting that extra length for articulation, is the benefit of these is they can also compress down super small. So I want to say that's like 27, 28 millimeter eye to eye. So basically they compress like a short stock shock. So these aren't meant to give you like a lifted ride. They're meant to be able to compress them and keep your ride low, but give you articulation when you need it. So you typically want to use some kind of limit system to control those so you're not sitting the ride sky high. And if you use the stiff springs, you definitely will be sitting this thing super high. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to swap these into the golds all the way around. And then I think because these links are fixed, we're not going to have any adjustment. So I should be able to go ahead and mock up the axles onto the frame, even though we don't have a transmission or drive shafts yet. So I think that is the next step here, to see if we can get some sort of, you know, 3/4 limping along slider frame here, even though we're missing a vital component. But anyways, it's progress. Okay, I think I've got this rear end licked. That didn't sound very good, but it is nice and smooth, and doesn't seem to be binding. So one little note here on these shocks, the outer flange wants to be on the outside, and then you're going to want to remove the O-ring from those. So you give these guys a little bit of room to wiggle so they can stay straight and twist with that axle. I put them on with the O-rings, and they did bind up just a hair. So this is just nice and smooth. So we'll work on limiting those to keep them down. But I did take off that upper link riser, which is removable. And I rotated the diff back by putting these upper links in the furthest position back. So you can see the back of the diff doesn't really touch. Let's see if we can see it this way. The back is kind of kicked up, the links hit. So I could rotate that forward a little more, but this is going to get that drive shaft basically following the line of those high clearance links. So it will come out straight and then angle down. So that's a little trick I learned on the hard park builds to keep that tucked up and out of the way. So we may adjust that a little more later, but I think I'm gonna start with it there. Speaking of those flanges, one thing I forgot to mention on all of these upper links, you're going to want to flip the flanges opposite. So the flange needs to be towards the nut here, but then it needs to be towards the hardware head here. So they need to be opposite. The bottoms don't matter because they're double captured on each end. So anyways, that is the rear. Looks like it's working nice and smooth. So we may adjust it a little more once the drive shafts are in. What is really cool is these towers are modular, so you can slide them forward and back in the frame. So this is where they showed it on the R Factor, so I'm not sure if we can adjust these, but that may be something else that can tweak the suspension. I believe the fronts may be pinned because they tie into the cage, so you may not be able to move these with this R Factor, but of course, not really sure without being able to get that cage on there. So I did end up using some spacers up here. I used some nice Injora aluminum spacers rather than these plastic ones they provide. And one thing, when you use these spacers, you want to be cognizant of the thickness. So once you start stepping up to any of these bigger ones, you may have to go to like a 12 millimeter or even longer. So these are 10s that it comes with. So with this little skinny one, I could still use a 10, but if I go any bigger, I'm gonna have to get 12s, and those are harder to come by. But that's the notes so far. So I'm gonna get the front axle hung, probably just the same, and of course get the sliders back on there. I had to get those off to be able to get those upper links on there and access the hardware head on the outside. But the only other note is definitely use some thread locker on these nuts. And actually I'm gonna come back a little further in the build and probably thread lock most all of these that go into metal on the frame. The ones that go into plastic, you don't need to, but like the shock towers, definitely the shocks, links, a lot of that stuff is metal into metal. So it's better to be on the safe side, but I don't like to do that early while I'm still taking things on and off and setting it up, because it'd just be a pain in the butt. But anyways, a little more and I think we'll have a slider. Here we are with the almost 100% slider, and looks like we're gonna be sitting nice and low, nice and even, if not a lot changes here. So I was able to use the middle upper link hole on that servo tray to lean it back. So you can see I've got a little caster there, just slips by the tray. So I don't know if I could lean it the furthest back. I think it would collide with that battery tray. But it's set up pretty well now. It's not the exact same caster lean as the shock, but it's definitely gonna help keep that tire out of it. But of course, those may adjust as we move forward later on in the build, but you can see if I can get it limited, it'll sit nice and low, and then it's gonna have pretty massive articulation. So nice and smooth on the front and rear. Did the same treatment to the shocks on the front, but I think it's all gonna work out, at least axle and suspension wise. So kind of a little disappointed here. This is, I think, where we're gonna have to end, but I feel like I might as well get the transmission in there. Let's get the cage on there as janky as we can get it with it being warped. And then we'll get the body on there a little crooked-esque. So that is kind of a janky little mock-up here, but you can start to get the essence of where this is going. So there's still quite a bit to do, as you can see, and gonna wait patiently on some responses from little guy, see what they say about that odd situation with the transmission, and then of course with this accidentally warped cage here. So we'll get that worked out and be able to move forward with this guy. But I think for the time being, this is going to do it for stage one here. So we are gonna end with 75% slider here. And I guess some things to look out for if you're starting in on this comp chassis build, or the R Factor for that matter. But want to say thanks for coming along. Sorry you had a few hiccups here. That's how it goes sometimes. I'm not going to blame little guy. Manufacturing issues happen, you know, to everybody. This is not unique to them. So I've really never had any problems with their parts, and I've always had great customer service. So we'll just see what happens, but I'm sure they will come through with some acceptable solution for me. But with that said, I hope you enjoyed the build so far. I want to say thanks for coming along, and until next time, thanks for watching.